Mm. And so then with bodhicitta in our minds and hearts, we can do the verse of refuge in bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to the merits of giving and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Good to see everybody. Let's see. So we're on the we've been covering the mind and mental factors, right? And we're on the section on the 11 virtuous mental factors. And we previously covered faith, shame and embarrassment, non-attachment, non-hatred, and non-ignorance. So we're up to the 7th of those virtuous mental factors, which is effort. You'll notice sometimes in some texts, it'll say, in Sanskrit, that's virya. Because like that is it's the same verbal root as like virility, I think is what they say. It's that same because there's a similar sort Sanskrit has some similar verbal roots to English. So it's that kind of anyway. So usually it's translated as effort. Geshe Rabtin's book translates it as enthusiasm, but this text and art both translated as effort. So there's a lot to say here about effort, but we'll start with let's look at first what we'll look at there are two like kind of definitions or descriptions that our text gives. So the first, it says, regarding effort, the Abhidharma, the Compendium of Knowledge, says, what is effort? Response, right? It is a mind that is enthusiastic in regard to armoring, application, non-inferiority, irreversibility, and non-complacency. It has the function of fulfilling and accomplishing the class of virtue. So it says, just as has been said above, the mind that is enthusiastic about virtue is effort. So we're going to get to these, I think it's 5, armoring, application, non-inferiority, irreversibility, and non-complacency. They're going to be described on the next page, so I'm not going to explain them yet because it'll come in the text. But a couple of points that are made here. One is the definition of effort here, right, is by its very nature, its function is to fulfill and accomplish the class of virtue. And as our text says below that, right, it's enthusiastic about virtue, right? So it's a mind, right? And so effort's a state, or it's a mental factor, first of all, remember that, right? It's not a behavior and it's not a state of the body, it's a mental factor, right? So it's a mind that feels enthusiastic about something virtuous. And then we'll read just the next quote, and then he quotes Acharya Vasubandhu in his discussion of the 5 aggregates, which, I've been quoting, that's translated, here it's called the Summary of the 5 Heaps, same text. Art Engel translated that with a commentary by Srimati. So it exists in English, this text. But so Vasubandhu says, what is effort? And he gives a different description, same essence, but a different description. He says, it is the antidote for laziness and a mind that is enthusiastic about virtue. Art translates that, and it's an antidote to laziness and an exertion of the mind towards virtue. One commentator said it's delight. So what some of them said, what it's enthusiasm about virtue. One Geshe commenting said it's delight in virtue, taking delight in doing what's good. And I'll also quote Geshe Rabtin. He calls it enthusiasm. So he says enthusiasm is a distinct mental factor that acts as an antidote to laziness and joyously engages in wholesome activity. It has the functions of actualizing wholesome qualities not yet actualized and bringing those that have been actualized to completion. I like his definition. I think it's like a more complete definition, right? So he says, we can go back over that. So he's first of all says it's a mental factor, right? It's a distinct mental factor. It serves as an antidote to laziness, which we're going to get to what that means. And it joyously, right? Like others said enthusiasm or delight. Geshe Rabtin uses the word joyously. Engages in wholesome activity. And it has the function of actualizing wholesome qualities that have not yet been actualized and bringing those that have been actualized to completion. That's a kind of interesting definition. So you get the sense here, right? So first of all, it's a mind that puts energy into something that wants to put energy into something virtuous, that takes delight or joy in doing virtuous things. So those are a couple points. Now, I wanted to go into for a moment because a couple, 2 or 3 of these things I've read already say it's an antidote to laziness. So what's laziness in Buddhism? And I think that's worth looking at a little bit. And generally, there are 3 kinds of laziness mentioned in Buddhism. Only one of which, and I think that's important because again, with these terms, effort, and also laziness, I think. Being talking about them in, they have a different story. Almost all the terms, have you been noticing this? I have really, as we're going through this text. There are all these words that translators are using to describe mental factors, which they have to do. They're translating, and as we've gone along, I keep noticing this, that like there aren't really. I mean, the English words have different connotations. Usually, I mean, they're the right words, they're the closest words you can get, right? Enthusiasm or effort. Shame was one, right? Like when we looked at shame, the English connotations weren't really the same as what the Tibetan word was getting at, and that's been true for a number of these things. So I think laziness and effort are going to find the same thing to some extent, and they're connected. So I think it's worth looking at laziness because through understanding laziness, you can better understand effort. So there are 3 kinds of laziness. The first of them, I think, is what we usually mean in English when we say laziness. So the first one is, they call it sometimes the laziness of procrastination. Right. So that's a mind that feels lethargic, that wants to put off, a virtuous activity. That says, I'll do it later. That's not enthusiastic, but is kind of, what's the word? Yeah, lethargic or unenergized. Right, and that in general, it thinks, some other time, something like that. So I think that's what we usually mean by laziness in English. So effort overcomes that. And by the way, a common Buddhist practice to overcome that one is meditation on the precious human life and impermanence. Right, when you meditate on impermanence, it could inspire you to not want to procrastinate. So that's an antidote to that one. We'll get to other antidotes, but. I think the second kind of laziness is interesting and it's a huge topic. So the second one, which I'm not going to spend too long on, but it is a huge topic. And the way they call it is, one translator called it, or one commentary called it, adherence or enthusiasm for what is non-virtuous. And the reason I wanted to pause there is I actually think this kind of laziness is what most people in English mean by effort. In other words, and especially I'm sort of aware of it. I mean, people here are in different places, but living, it's funny, if you live I live near Washington, D.C., as some of you do, but if you live near any, I was sort of contemplating this, and I was thinking, actually, also, yeah. So I guess I'll say this, so adherence or enthusiasm for what is non-virtuous. Later in this commentary, he's going to say things like farming. He's Tibetan, right? Our author, so he says farming. He says, he says, but actually, I'll read that quote here. It's going to come later on this page. He says, every kind of striving is called making effort in today's world. But the above passages indicate that exertion for the sake of this life alone, such as farming, is not effort. For effort is taught to be enthusiasm for virtue. Exertion for the affairs of this life is the discordant class of effort, known as adherence to unwholesomeness. So in other words, like, it's kind of like, living outside Washington, D.C., I'll say, like, I know quite a few, I've met many people who work 70 hours a week or 60 hours a week, who according to Buddhism are incredibly lazy. Now, Buddhism would not say, Buddhism would say that's very lazy. In our culture, people say, oh, that's amazing. Person works so hard. I've had patients come to therapy and say, like, oh, I read this thing by a billionaire and he said you should, like, get up an hour earlier to do this and then stay up an hour later to do that. And, because you really want to, if you want to get ahead of everybody else and make more than everybody else, then you do this and you do that, right? And so they thought, oh, I want to make more effort. But according to Buddhism, that's laziness. And the billionaire is lazy and the person doing their advice is lazy. Also, like, so if so working hard, if it's for this life, is lazy, according to this definition, because it's just for this life, right? It's not for something meaningful, is what they're suggesting. And then, like, also, though, like, right, then they're like, that's, and actually, if you live near a big city, then there's a lot of, in America. And actually, I guess I'm just pausing here. So often, also, like, I don't know, I think all Americans in general have this quality. I think maybe people in other cultures do too. But I think of, like, so often, especially men, sometimes have this idea, like, if you're not, it could be women too, but I've talked to some men particularly about that, where it's like, if you don't have a big career, or if you don't have this, or if you don't have that, then you're wasting your life, right? And Buddhism is saying, no, if you do have those things, you may be wasting your life. So I'm just pointing out the difference here of the connotation of the words, right? Lazy and effort. Actually, I was pausing to share this story, but I'll share a story about a friend. A dear friend is, I'll also share her name because it's fine. But Paula, so I don't know if some of you know Paula Chichester. She's used to be a nun. She did, like, many 3-year retreats, two 3-year retreats and many other retreats. She's done an amazing amount of retreat. She teaches in FPMT. Now she's a layperson. For quite a few years, she was a nun. And I remember her saying, one time we would hang out and do Dharma practices together for many years. I know her since, like, the early 90s, maybe, or something. She's an old friend, but anyway, when she was a nun one day, she said, like, it was getting an effort. She said, oh, like, when you want, like, she's a student of Lama Zopa, who stays up all night, right, doing Dharma practice. And then she was saying, like, she made this point. She was a nun at the time, so I thought it was quite funny. But she said, she was like, like, people in their 20s want to stay up all night, partying and listening to music and having sex. She said, when you feel that way about Dharma, that's effort. You want to stay up all night and party, but it's like you want to do a puja all night or something. And I thought that was quite funny, because she was a nun at the time. But she's still, she's now, like, she's a layperson and older, and she's still, I think, is staying up all night doing pujas and things like that. So, the point here is that, like, whatever it is, if people make a lot, and I guess what I'm getting at is people make give incredible energy to all different things, right? And but if it's what this is saying, this Buddhist definition is saying, is that, again, so what the kinds of laziness, adherence or enthusiasm for what is non-virtuous. Non-virtuous is very broad in this sense, right? As according to this text, is anything that's for this life alone, right? So it doesn't, so actually, one other example I remember, like, I was told this story before. It's like, I remember I was, like, getting up one day. Oh, I was when Reba Rinpoche he had cancer, and I would get up quite early and drive. It was before work. I would get up early and drive to his house to take him to an oncology appointment in the morning, and then take him back to his house, and then come back and go to work. So I was really tired, and I'm not really a morning person either. I'm not, certainly not an early morning person. So I remember I was, like, there, and he had so I get there, and we're getting in the car, and he looks at me, so he starts, like, laughing, and he says, "You look really tired." and I said, yeah. And then he said, that's great. And he said, like, he was like, you're here and you're tired, but you're doing this. And he said, like, and it's somebody. And he said, there's so many people in America right now who are awake and tired, but they got up early to go hunt, like to kill an animal, or they're soldiers. They got up early to train to kill a human. And then he said, so like, there are so many people who are getting up early and are tired and making effort to kill, actually. And he said, you're making effort to like take somebody to a doctor. How great. It's great reason to be tired. Like he was getting at effort, right? He was saying like, so people make incredible efforts to do things, all different things, right? And they're based on like what, actually, it's based on what you value, right? So this is saying if you're, that if you, so anyway, so effort overcomes that kind of laziness also. And then there's a third kind of laziness, which again, I think is really interesting. And it's definitely not, these last two, I don't believe are what in English we usually think of when we say laziness. The third one is, they call it the laziness of a discouragement, thinking I'm not capable. And I would call that sometimes, and other people have done this too, that's the laziness of low self-esteem. So according to Buddhism, also, low self-esteem or lack of confidence or feeling I can't do it is a form of laziness, spiritual laziness, which I think is quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think only Buddhism says that. I've never seen any other thing other than Buddhist psychology that asserts that idea. But the idea here is like actually in Buddhism, it's like what they're saying is you have Buddha nature, right? Shantideva says like that, like insects have Buddha nature, and you have Buddha. So if and insects are much further, they can practice. He says you can. And he said, and so what he's getting at there is like, it's a little bit like this. Like if I think what this form of this teaching on laziness of low self-esteem is like, it's when the Buddhas look at you, what they say actually is when a bodhisattva who looks at you, they see, and one of the things they see is a future Buddha, right? And so then if you're saying, oh, I can't do it, and like it's too hard or something, and I was thinking, like one day I was thinking about this one. It's like, if you, it's kind of like if you were like if somebody said, oh, there are people starving over there, and if you were saying that to somebody who had like $1 billion, and they said, well, it's too hard to help those people, you would feel, what are you talking about? Like you have $1 billion and they're starving right there. Just do it. It's not that hard. Just help them. Whereas, oh no, I just can't do it. Like the Buddhas look at you. What they're saying is Buddhas and Bodhisattvas look at you and they see somebody who has incredible wealth, spiritual potential, spiritual capacity. And then if you say, oh, I can't do it, they're saying like sentient beings are miserable. They're going to the lower realms. They're suffering immeasurably. You have the capacity to benefit them. And if you say, oh, I can't do it, it's not true. And it's kind of like, what's the right way to say it right? It's a way that we squander our lives, and don't put effort into the correct thing. So anyway, so those are the three kinds of laziness. I just want to pause. You see what I'm getting at? Those, the second two are not what we usually think of as the word laziness. So effort is the antidote to all three of those, is one point. I'm funny. Just 2 days ago, my partner Shayla's in retreat, and each day she'll text me, and we text a little bit each day. So there was one day where it was just making me laugh. She was one day she was thinking about the suffering in the world. Like she was, I guess, meditating, and she was thinking about the suffering in the world, and she said like, "Oh, I just feel so discouraged. Like it feels hopeless." She said, "Today I felt like giving up or something." And then I wrote back to her and I said, well, you really don't have any choice because you already took the bodhisattva vow, so you're stuck. And then she was just laughing and laughing and laughing. She kept laughing, and she was like, yeah, I'm stuck. You're right. I made the vow to benefit all beings. I have no choice. It's like you can't. I've already made the vow, so it's too late. And so then she was really like, she kept writing later that night. She said, oh, I was still laughing like hours later. Like I'm stuck, but I'm stuck with compassion, so it's okay. I thought that was great, but it's over. That was that last kind of laziness, right? It's like recognizing that last kind of laziness is discouragement, right? A kind of spirit. What's the word? A discouragement at the suffering of the world. Anyway, so you'll see more about the antidotes to that. But the point here is that that's a form of spiritual laziness which we have to overcome. and not get discouraged. We'll talk more about that, but okay. So effort overcomes those three kinds of laziness. And then Shantideva says, right, what is effort? It is an enthusiasm for virtue, right, or a joy, taking joy in virtue. You know, I already read that quote, right, about like farming, adherence to things of this world. I want to pause for a second and just ask you guys a question, just to notice something. And the purpose of it is to notice something. So there's, you know, everybody here has studied Mahayana Buddhism some, and so you know there are 6 perfections, right? And one of the perfections is the perfection of joyous effort. So I just want to ask you, here we're studying a mental factor of effort. And I want to ask you, is this identical to, or is it, what's the relationship between this and the perfect effort, right? And then it's the same Tibetan word, the effort part, but there's a difference between effort and then it's like the difference between, in Sanskrit, it would be virya versus virya paramita. So what's the difference between effort and the perfection of effort, right? Of the 6 perfections. Do you know, are they identical, or is there a difference between them? Because we're going to get into descriptions of effort that connect to joyous effort, the perfection of joyous effort. Oh, sorry, Namchu.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the perfection of effort, my understanding is that's when your effort is dedicated towards your enlightenment. You're doing this for enlightenment, for the benefit of everyone, because they're suffering, and you not only want them to stop suffering, but you want them to become enlightened, you know, eventually. Whereas to me, the other is virtuous, but it's not dedicated towards that. And I would even say that maybe many people have a joyous effort, like in when they dedicate their life to public service, and they're doing it joyfully, and in that would involve many fields, but they're not necessarily, you know, thinking enlightenment, obviously. And it may even look like it's all, you know, about this lifetime, but in fact it is about others, you know.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So exactly. So in other words, one way I would say this is the perfection of effort. The perfection of effort is one example of effort, right? But not all, so all perfections of effort are effort, but not all efforts are perfection, right? Because again, Khensa Rinpoche actually is described. He said, for something to be a perfection, like a paramita, right? Paramita translation in English would be perfection, I guess. But he was saying, for something to be a paramita, at the minimum, it has to be done under the influence of bodhicitta, as Venerable Damcha said, right? So at the minimum, you have to have bodhicitta motivation. And he said, really, ideally, for something to be a paramita, it should also be done with an awareness of the emptiness of the 3 spheres, or emptiness, you know. So, you know, so ideally, a paramita is done. The ideal version would be with bodhicitta motivation and an awareness of the emptiness, or emptiness of 3 spheres. You know, 3 spheres being the agent, the action, and the object. But at minimum, at least it has to have bodhicitta. You know, so many examples. So you see what I mean? So then any version of that's the perfection of effort is by definition a kind of effort, right? A virtue. If you have bodhicitta when you're doing it, that's virtue. So for sure, it's a effort. But there are countless examples of effort that could be not a perfection of effort, right? So for example, somebody who's striving for their own liberation, right, from samsara, and is doing a dharma practice, that would be effort, but not paramita of effort. Somebody who's doing a good action just to get a good rebirth, right? Actually, and that would be a Buddhist, or say you know, a practitioner of a different religious tradition who's being charitable in order to go to heaven, right? That would be virtue. And if they're doing it joyfully and with effort, that would be an example of effort, but it's not the bodhicitta, right? They're not striving for enlightenment. They just want to go someplace better. That would not be perfection of effort. So there are many, as Damchu said, there could be examples of service, right? Public service, that would be that. So there are many examples of effort that are not the paramita of effort, but anybody who's practicing the paramita effort by definition has this mental factor. So I just wanted to differentiate those points. And then Wilhelmina has her hand up. Go ahead, Wilhelmina. Oh, Wilhelmina, you have your,
Speak.
oh, there you go.
Done.
Good, good.
Okay. Um, um, I've been thinking a lot about selflessness as effort is concerned as well, which is the same as what we are talking about, I think. And I've been thinking about how you get there, and how you get there. One of the things was to realize that we are all the same. If you look like Neil deGrasse Tyson says, we're all stardust, really. And he always talks, look at from outside the earth and look back to the earth with the whole universe with it, and you see it differently. And I think how you get there is a lot through realizing all the mistakes that you yourself have made and that you're trying to purify, and how they came about, to figure out what happened in your life. And then seeing that everybody comes also with a certain destination to this world, hopefully, and trying to make the best of it. And that is how you can love everybody, however many mistakes they make that could make you upset or not. Is this a way to look at selflessness, or do you have any other input for that?
You mean like selflessness? Like, I'm not sure if you mean like do you mean like selflessness in the sense of, because it sounds like what you're describing in a way is also equanimity, right? Like having a sense of equanimity. So do you mean that, or do you, because like obviously selflessness in Buddhism can mean like different things. Like I don't know if you also mean like selflessness in the sense of like no self, like emptiness, or do you mean like selflessness like service to others with a sense of equanimity and not having having equanimity? Is that, which one do you mean? Oh, you muted it. Because that was my confusion. That I was just wasn't sure if you meant like equanimity, because it sounds like what you were describing is a very good meditation for equanimity, actually, right? For how to develop equanimity. Anyway, I was confused a little. The word selflessness can have different connotations, right? Because it could also mean emptiness. But I think what Wilhelmina was getting at, correct, in terms of like that, in terms of how to not get discouraged, right? Like, so in other words, recognizing that we all make mistakes. Yeah. So that's what you mean, right? Not get discouraged, and having equanimity so that keeps us from getting discouraged.
Right.
In our practice of love.
Yeah.
I think that's right then. Yeah, that would be a great meditation for that. So that, because that wouldn't be a meditation on the emptiness of self, but it would be a great meditation for equanimity and to not get discouraged when we come across people, like, when we ourselves make mistakes or other people make mistakes, to keep our love. I think it's a great meditation for that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. So then I want to make another general comment before we go on to the next point, which is something from earlier in this text, actually, I wanted to come back to about, because it connects to effort now. Under faith, when we faith as a mental factor, we said something connected to effort, which is faith leads to aspiration, which leads to effort. We said that last time, and I just want to bring that back then, and I want to bring that back up. So one of the ways to enhance our practice of joyous effort, I like the word joyous effort, by the way. I think it has the connotation of, actually, because part of the reason I like that word is, think about it this way, actually, whether it's just this life, for the rest of your life, or if you think bodhisattvas who have to practice, or going to practice, not just have to, or going to practice for countless eons, maybe, right? Well, you're only going to sustain, actually, I want to point that out. You're only going to keep doing things that you find joy in, right? In other words, if you are doing something that you find unpleasant, you're not going to do it forever, right? Eventually, you're going to say, this is annoying. right? But if you have to do something, imagine if you have to do something for an eon, right? Well, then it better be something you love, right? And so one point, that's why I like joyous effort, is that the point is like, if you're going to keep doing it, it better be joyful, right? And that's what Shanti Deva says also. He says like, anyway, and this text is going to say the same thing, but so how do you develop this kind of joyous effort? And what one thing the text points out earlier, and I'm just bringing it back up here, is you develop faith, right? And faith is like a conviction, right? It said here, a conviction and clarity wishing with respect to an existent thing that is endowed with excellence and power. And I just want to point something out, like, so it's that, you know, you develop a kind of conviction that something is worthwhile. And if that conviction becomes strong enough, then you develop an aspiration for that thing, right? And then once you develop an aspiration, you're willing to work hard for it, right? And that's joyous effort. And actually, I just want to say, like, that's true. This is this is basic psychology they're actually teaching there, right? Isn't it? And I'll say, like, it's weird. You can watch people do that practice. It's easy. Sadly, in my experience, often, you know, there's a teaching in Buddhism that it's good to spend time with Arya Bodhisattvas, you know, if you want to make progress. Unfortunately, it's a lot easier to spend time with people who are making mistakes, you know, in our world. You know, they're easier to access to some extent. Maybe not. Maybe there are many Arya Bodhisattvas who are hidden, but you know. But anyway, if with ordinary worldly affairs, you can see how this works, can't you? Like I actually, you know, like if you watch if you just watch a teenager, right, where somebody's like saying to them, "Oh, this is the best video game. Oh, it's awesome. Oh, everybody who's cool plays this video game," right? And at first, the kid doesn't know what that video game is. And then people keep going, "Oh, no, it's really great." And, "Oh, wow." If all their friends are like talking about it in school, right, then they're going to start developing an aspiration and saying to their parent, "Please, oh, I want that video game. Oh, I want it for my birthday. Oh, I want it for the holiday. Oh, I want it." Right. They're going to develop a very strong aspiration and they're going to put a ton of energy into playing that game because all their friends are playing it, right? That's not faith because it's not virtuous, but it's the same idea. You develop a conviction that something's good, then you aspire to have it, and then you make effort towards it, right? And that's how people develop careers, right? Like, you know, people develop oftentimes the whole career because somebody says, "Oh, it's really great to do this career," and whatever, you know, for whatever reasons, right? And then you develop an aspiration, right? And people like put humongous amounts of energy into that, don't they? Like, I was noticing that with like I remember one point I was watching, like, I mean, just they're American, right? I was watching like where people were doing like, "Oh, it's so great if you're this branch of the military, and oh, it's amazing if you're in that branch," you know, and they see a young person go, "Oh, wow, like, you know, that'd be really good for me. I should join the military." And you know, and it's just they heard that so much that they developed a kind of aspiration, right? So my point is whether it's a job, whether it's a whatever, you develop, and when you develop an aspiration, then you're willing to make all kinds of effort. And people make amazing effort. It's not effort according to Buddhism, if it's worldly, right? They put a lot of time into something with energy. But if it's not virtuous in Buddhism, it's not this mental factor. Anyway, my point is that in Buddhism, then the point I'm making is that how do you develop your effort? And it goes against the world. The reason why I'm giving you those other examples is it goes against the world in a way, right? In other words, you have to actually cultivate in your own mind an enthusiasm and a respect and a belief in that something is valuable, right? Like, how do you develop that for compassion? And that was where actually in that night when I texted Sheila, that was what it was. It was like, it was a conviction. Like, in other words, no matter what, I'll stand with compassion. I'm happy to stand with compassion. I'm happy to be stuck with compassion. You know, let anything come along, I'll stick with that and I'll be happy to have done it. If I die tomorrow, I'm glad to have stood with compassion. You know, if you come to that kind of faith, right? That's faith. Is like, if you say, if you can develop an inner state where you can feel, I have faith and compassion, and whatever comes, I stand by that and I'll do my best, you know, and even if I'm criticized for it, I don't care. I stand with compassion. That's an example of faith, right? And once you have faith, you aspire to cultivate compassion. Once you have that aspiration, then you actually do the practices to cultivate it. So the same applies, right? If you think of Buddhahood, or if you think of seeing emptiness or whatever, you know, so first you have to develop a kind of, what's the word? A conviction that something has value. And actually, I just want to say one more, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I think it's okay. Look at what we ourselves, like whatever you put effort into, right? It means, it's not faith, because faith has to be in something actually existent that's exalted and virtuous. But think about whatever you put effort into, right? And if you check your own psychology, what this is saying is, well, you have conviction that that's a value. You may not like to admit it, if it's not something virtuous, but on some level, deep down, you internalized or developed or have some kind of conviction that that thing is has value. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that what we put effort into, and actually I've also noticed it before, if what do you have conviction in? Look how you spend your time, actually, right? Like if you check, what do I actually put my effort into? That tells you what you have conviction in. Because like sometimes you can say that, right? Oh, if somebody says I'm Buddhist, but then if they put like 5 minutes a day into their Buddhism and the rest of the day into other things or something, I mean, that's okay. It's not a criticism, but check then what do you have conviction in? Does that make sense? Because that's telling you what you have conviction and what you aspire to. Because what you aspire to is what you put effort into. Does that make sense? And so that's a psychological point that's being made. Okay. Then it says here, he quotes Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path, right? The Lamrim Chenmo, which is in English, right? The great exposition of the stages of the path. There's 3 volumes in English. So it says that lists 3 kinds of effort. Effort of armoring, the effort of gathering virtuous qualities, and the effort of enacting the welfare of sentient beings. And then he quotes the Abhidharma, the Compendium of Knowledge, which teaches 5 types of effort: the effort of armoring, the effort of application, the effort of non-inferiority, the effort of irreversibility, and the effort of non-complacency. There are many different lists of kinds of effort, or joyous effort, which is wonderful, actually. If you look in various Buddhist texts, you'll find all kinds of teachings on joyous effort, it's like, that's also just something I was thinking about as I was preparing this class, is like, actually, like, this is a personal reflection, but I one thing I just personally love about Buddhism, it's one of my personal loves for it, is that like you could go on and on, like these are just 2 lists, right? 3 kinds of joyous effort and 5 kinds of joyous effort. And actually, like, Buddhism's the only, I remember once I was one time at my old house, Khyentse Rinpoche was teaching, and he said, at this point you generate this kind of bliss. And then he had to take like a long time describing, because he said there are so many, it's not this kind of bliss, and it's not that kind of bliss, it's not this kind of bliss, and it's not that, it's a unique kind of bliss that's this one, it's not all these other kinds. And I was like, just the fact, like I was like, where else in the world do you have a tradition that has, like, where you have so many kinds of bliss, you have to like spend 35-40 minutes explaining which kind of bliss you're talking about, because there are so many kinds of bliss. That's Tibetan Buddhist tradition, And the same goes for joy here, a joyous effort. Is actually, I was looking in Art Engel has another translation. It's a translation of the Bodhisattva Bhumi, the Bodhisattva's path to unsurpassed enlightenment. And that has a chapter on joyous effort. And I was going through that yesterday, and I was going, oh my goodness, there are all these lists. I was familiar with these 2 sets, but it has like maybe a dozen different lists of kinds of joyous effort and different states of joy that bodhisattvas have as they're making effort towards the benefit of beings. I was like, wow, how cool is that? Like, they're all describing different inner experiences, So these are. So anyway, the 3, first of all, the text is going to cover the 5 in detail. The 3 are the effort of armoring. We're going to describe in a minute, because that's the first in both lists. Then the second in the first list is the effort of gathering virtuous qualities. That's making effort inside yourself, right? So making effort in developing virtues inside you. And then the third is the effort of enacting the welfare of sentient beings, right? So one is, of those second 2 in the first list, I just want to clarify. One is sort of internal, right? Doing virtuous activities. So it'd be like making great effort at doing virtuous things. Going up on story 7 in a mood or something, but maybe I just was remembering that really dear friend of mine in California. He was funny when there was a point when he was getting really into Tibetan Buddhism. He's in the Cognition tradition, and he said, I'm not doing a Nundro's 100,000 this and 100,000 that. And then he said, I have no interest. He was having a kind of spiritual laziness, right? And so his teacher said to him, oh, I'm giving you a special dispensation, just do 10,000 of each. And then he thought he was getting a good deal, so he said, all right, getting a good deal here. So he did 10,000 of each, and he said that was fun. That was really fun doing the 10,000. He went back to his teacher and he said that was great experience. I did the 10,000. I'm done. She said, good. Now go back and do 100,000 of each. And he said, okay, because now he knew it was fun. It was like his teacher. He said, he said, I'm giving you a good deal, and you're getting off easy. Everybody else has to do 100,000. You only have to do 10. But then he ended up doing 100, and an extra 10 actually, because he went back and did the 100,000. But it was because his teacher wanted him to see it was joyous. That it was a joyous experience. It was quite funny. But that would be an internal, right? Get the joyous effort of gathering virtuous qualities inside yourself. That's different than the joyous effort of enacting the welfare of sentient beings. That's doing activity to benefit others, right, out in the world, benefiting anybody, whoever. So that's that list. But now we're going to do the list from the Abhidharma. So the first, and these are getting at, again, at the psychology of how do you, because we've already said what effort is, but this is getting at how do you develop it. So the first is the effort of armoring. And he says it's like donning the great armor of the preceding attitude, a mental enthusiasm prior to embarking on a virtuous activity. So this one is getting at, first of all, so you develop this one before beginning a virtuous activity. And the reason why they call it armor, right, is that it's making a point, which is if a soldier were going into battle, if they put their armor on after a spear is thrown at them or a bullet is shot at them, it's going to be useless, right? Whereas you can't put the armor on after, before. And so what this is saying is this: what this is getting at is, if you're going to do something virtuous, it's not always easy, right? And Buddhism is saying, yeah, it's not supposed to be easy. Whereas becoming enlightened, if becoming enlightened were easy, everybody would already have been enlightened. It takes effort, right? And so what this is saying is there are going to come obstacles. So before you start any given virtuous activity, put on your armor, which means a preceding attitude. So this is done before. So up front, you think, okay, this activity is meaningful. It's worth doing. And you cultivate an attitude of joy in doing it, right? This is great. Want to do this. And there is it's meaningful. It's going to be of great benefit. You think of all the reasons why you'd want to do it, right? And you go over them and over them until you develop a kind of resolve that feels, yeah, obstacles will come. I don't care, right? I don't care if obstacles come, because this has meaning. This is worth putting my time into. This is worth the effort. And so you think to yourself, whatever obstacles come, I'll keep going, and I'm happy to do it. And this is a joyous thing to get to do. I'm grateful. You could think, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to do this. How wonderful I have a chance to do something with this great meaning. So here, I'll read these verses. It says, so he said, and this is getting at a psychological state, by the way. So it's from Arya Shura. He says, consider a long day and night that spans the past and future limits of samsara, right? So he says, imagine that samsara is limitless, right? So he's saying, imagine that limitless length of time is one day. Now imagine a year made up of such days. Then imagine a long eon made up of such years. So what's he getting at? You're imagining an infinite amount of time, and a number of such eons equaling the drops of water in the ocean, right? Imagine when you're looking out at the Pacific or Atlantic Ocean. So you're imagining what are you imagining there? You're imagining infinite amount of time, which we don't usually do we? It's not our, if you look in Indian texts, they describe these kind of long lengths of time. We don't think that way usually. So you know what he's getting at there? You're thinking of what? Infinite. You're thinking about infinity, an infinite amount of time. Then he says, through cultivation for such a period, I will generate but a single mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, right? Even though it's necessary to practice in such a manner for each of the other collections, due to compassion, I will have no weariness. Without indolence, I will achieve excellent enlightenment. So what's he saying? He's actually making a point that His Holiness Dalai Lama often makes, right? Dalai Lama often says, your inner attitude, right? He's describing an inner state, right? He's saying your inner state should be, however, For what Shantideva is like, for as long as space endures, for as long as sentient beings endure, may I too endure to dispel the misery of the world, right? It's a state of mind you're cultivating that says, it doesn't matter how long it takes. In other words, it's like what I was saying earlier, due to compassion, I will have no weariness. In other words, I stand with compassion. I stand with bodhicitta. I don't care if it takes an infinite amount of time. What this text is saying is that's the attitude of a bodhisattva. Right? The attitude of a bodhisattva is that kind of armor, right? That says, even if for one, there's a verse in the Lama Chopa has that verse on joyous effort. Viewing the stages of the path in the Guru Puja, where the Panchen Lama Losing Chogi Gyaltsen says, even if we must remain for an ocean of eons, same point he's making, ocean of eons, right? That's the same idea, image, right? An ocean of time. In the fiery hells of the lowest hell of Ichi, for the sake of even one sentient being, I seek your blessings. He's seeking the blessings of his guru, we're seeking the blessings, to complete the perfection of joyous effort and to strive with compassion for supreme enlightenment and not be discouraged. Right? He's making the same point this verse is making, right? That even for one being, he's saying, I would spend an eons, not just one eon, but an ocean of eons to benefit even one being. The point here is not that, the point here is that that's the kind of mental state, right, that this armoring is. Then it says, when in psychic existence, samsara, giving up thinking about one's own suffering and produce that infinite robust armor that is the compassionate hero's perfect adoption in conduct. So what's it saying? It's just saying you cultivate a mind like that, right? And whatever your project is, in general, it'd be bodhicitta right here. That's the best aspiration, the best. But whatever, I guess the point he's making is whatever project you take on, like if you take on a virtuous project, and actually we should do that, shouldn't we? Like, in other words, it's a good thing to do. So in a very general sense, if you want to practice Buddhism, you think I'm going to become a Buddha for the welfare of all sentient beings. That's the biggest project there is going to, that's the biggest project possible. But then even like in our life, we should take on other kinds of projects, right? Like, oh, I want to do this practice, or I want to do this retreat, or I want to study this subject, right? And you think the same way, and like what they're getting at is, it takes a very long time. That's okay. I'll keep going, so you cultivate this kind of joy without weariness and without, how does he say it? Without weariness or discouragement. So and so you do that up front, though. You get the idea. That's the upfront version, armor. So you think before you start, and then what they're saying is before you take on any project, actually, you pause and you think, and you generate this kind of, if it's a virtuous project, you develop this kind of mind of armor. Then the next one of the 5 is the effort of application, right? And by the way, so this one in brief is while you're doing. So the first one was up front, right? They said prior to, preceding the action. Now it's while you're doing. So there is while you're doing the virtuous action, it's a mind that's enthusiastic. It says when engaging in the practice. So application is while you're applying yourself, right? So you've developed this mind that thinks I'm going to do this. Now you're applying yourself to that project or effort. And so you do that. And what Geshe Rabten says, it's joy found while doing or in doing the process of Dharma practice. So while you're doing a particular practice or activity, it could be something to benefit others. It could be a practice internally or whatever. But it's taking joy and finding, and encouraging yourself and sort of, and so on. Art translates this one as a zealous effort, an effort driven by a strong aspiration. And then it says there are two, it says here, constant application and respectful application. I had to look at various sources to find it. Most of the commentaries didn't describe what those were, but I finally found one that did. So the constant application is pretty self-explanatory. It means once you've begun, that you continue making effort, right? You don't just give up, that you can apply yourself over time. So that's the constant. Constant doesn't mean every second, of course, because sometimes you have to pause, which we'll get to. But it's but it's that there's a kind of, they sometimes give an analogy here of like, if you've ever been, like, I'll give the example of the Grand Canyon, right? If you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, right, it's a humongous, right? And it's caught, it was created by the Colorado River, right? So that's a metaphor for constant application, right? In other words, that humongous things can be accomplished if you're willing to make effort over time, right? That river, if that river couldn't have created the canyon overnight, but over a vast expanse of time, it created a humongous, beautiful canyon. We can accomplish humongous things if we're willing to make constant application, so effort over time. And then respectful application. Respectful application was what Art translated as zealous. And what he said was, his translation said from Asanga, I think. From Asanga. Yeah, Asanga. This is an interesting point here, I think, psychologically, is respectful, he translated that as devotion. So in other words, respectful here means that you develop a kind of inner state of deep devotion for whatever you're doing. That is part of what sustains that effort, if that makes sense. So it's like you have a kind of deep devotion to whatever you're in the process of making effort at, which is what brings that sense of enthusiasm or joy. And I think, so for me, that would mean, this is my own contemplation on that, is that would mean that you have to then continue to think about how wonderful, right? How wonderful the thing is that you're getting to do, how wonderful the goal is that you're working towards, how wonderful the project is that so you develop a kind of more and more, what's the word, conviction, more and more devotion to that effort that you're making. It's the opposite of burnout, right? Actually, it's kind of it's the opposite of burnout. It's a sense of, what's the word? He said zealous, maybe excitement or joy or enthusiasm. All right, the third one is the effort of non-inferiority. And he says that is a generation of enthusiasm when engaging in virtue without a mind being discouraged, thinking, how could one such as I do this? So this one, I want to say, is a kind of resilience. And this one includes not disparaging yourself, right? And not indulging in low self-esteem. So I want to say, like, in this one, sometimes we do get discouraged, right? There are moments where we get discouraged. He's going to say more about that. By the way, Art translates non-inferiority as dauntless, a dauntless kind of effort. And Geshe Rabtin translates it as an unbreachable effort. It's an effort that cannot get discouraged. And so actual bodhisattvas, develop this level of this kind of unbreachable or daunt. I like that word, unbreachable effort. But actually, I wanted to just say a couple of words about this one. This is getting at resilience, actually. What this is getting at is that there are going to come hardships, and it's going to be difficult. When you do anything, and actually, it's kind of funny is whatever you do, they're going to be difficult. This isn't that true. Whereas if you do the stupidest nonsense, it's going to be difficult. And if you try to just whatever you do, it's going to be difficult because life isn't easy. And what this is saying is, what's it right? So we have to develop resilience, right? That's able, and especially if you're trying to work for the welfare of others, then you need resilience, right? And I've told this story before, but it's just reminding me of it. So it's just like, I remember, like, I mentioned Reeve Rinpoche when I was helping him when he had cancer. There came a point when he said, he had recovered, and then it came back, and then he was going to die. And he said, so he knew he was going to die, and he said, he said to me, he said other things, but the part, how did he say it? I'll leave out part. But the part that I was wanting to share is, there came a point when he said, he said, we're in this together, and I'll see you again. He said, I'm going to die, but I'll see you again. I now know the boy. He actually just called me this week. The boy was the 16-year-old, his reincarnation. He left me a few messages just this week, so he was right. We saw each other, we're seeing each other again. But he said, but anyway, he made this point. He said, he knew he was going to die, and I didn't know what was happening for me. But he said, some hardships are coming now. And he said, but we don't care because we're Dharma practitioners. And I remember at the time I thought, oh, I kind of care. Like, what is hardship? I don't like the idea of hardship. I was like, I wasn't dauntless. But he was giving right, a dauntless effort. And his dauntless effort was, what he was actually saying was, I'm going to die and then be born again. But I don't care. Like, that's not that'll be a little bit of a, like, death for him, like death. He was saying, even in the face of death, I'm not discouraged, right? He said that. He looked at me and he said, look at this old body. How am I going to work for others? The world is having all this suffering and all these problems. It needs more people to do something. He said, this old body can't do it. I need a young body to come back, because then I can continue working for others. That's why I need a new body. And he said, so I have to go get one. So I'll see you later, and then I'll come back and I'll keep working for others, right? That's dauntless effort, right? And like, I don't know, 6th or 7th rebirth. He's been doing that. I can't remember the number now. I think he was 6 and the current's the 7th, maybe, or something. That's dauntless effort, right? Lifetime after life. Like, it's like saying, I don't care how many times I die and come back, I'll just keep working for others, right? I'll continue working for others, body after body. Lifetime after lifetime, whatever it takes, because that's what the world needs, right? That was his attitude. I'm just giving an example. That's the effort of non-inferiority. It's the outright. So it's not saying, how could one such as I do that? It's saying, do this. It's saying, somebody has to do it. Let me be the one to do that. Right? And in the small ways, right? Like Lama Zopa Rinpoche says that when there's a conflict or between people, or when there's like something, right? He says that. He says, if you think, well, who should start the process of making peace? He says, you should, whenever you ask that question, the immediate answer should be me. I should be the one to start that. Don't wait for the other person, right? Is what he's saying. So anyway, so that's the effort of non-inferiority. It's this idea that so when obstacles come, that you feel good. That's okay. Like, there's that's the process, of becoming enlightened. And then he goes on to quote. Now he gives a bunch of quotes. So first is Arya Shura. He quotes from the Garanda verse. This is the previous Garanda verse story, the Jatakas. Those are the stories of the Buddha's previous lives. So it says, the first line, discouragement does not help one become free of deprivation. So what does that mean? Deprivation means if you lack something that you need, right? Being discouraged doesn't help you, does it? And then it says, therefore, do not be tormented by sorrow. The skills for accomplishing the required goals are made firm with ease, you will be freed from even huge difficulties. What's he saying here? I just want to sort of pause, because he's making a psychological point in this quote that the next one will make too. But what he's saying is, well, the first part's obvious, right? In other words, if something's going wrong, if you don't have what you need, if there are obstacles, if there are difficulties, if you get discouraged, that's not going to help you go along. But then he's making a deeper Buddhist point here, where he says, what he's basically saying is, one of the core teachings of Buddhism, which is, fundamental, is cause and result, right? Is creating the causes. And what he's saying is, don't become discouraged. It's like, he's not just saying like, oh, don't become discouraged, like for no reason. He's saying, recognize that if you create the cause, the result will come. In other words, so if you're having obstacles, it's just you haven't created the cause yet enough, right? So that's okay. Create the cause now. And what Buddhism is saying is take a long view, right? In other words, if you're not going to, and somebody pointed this out, like, actually I was there, in Los Angeles. I think I told that story. Some people heard it before, when somebody said, what's the quickest and easiest way to become enlightened? And they asked the Dalai Lama that in a huge auditorium. And this, for me, was a very important moment, because like the Dalai Lama just started weeping. And he started crying and crying. He just couldn't speak. And then he said, it's not cheap. It's not fast food. Basically, it's not fast food. There's not fast food here. This isn't like he didn't use this word, but he was basically saying it's not the McDonald's version of spirituality or something. Right? And he told the story of Milarepa, who achieved enlightenment in one lifetime. But what he pointed out was that the story of Milarepa was, he showed when he met, when in his last meeting with Gampopa, who was his greatest student, Gampopa left. He had given all to Gampopa, and Gampopa was leaving. And after Gampopa was almost out of voice range, Milarepa said, come back. I have one more secret instruction for you, right? And so Gampopa, like in the mountains, Gampopa had to climb all the way back up, like the mountain or whatever, the cave. And he said, I've given you, like a vase, whatever, pouring water into water. I've given all the teachings, but there's one more very secret instruction I have to give you, or secret instruction I have to give you. And then Milarepa mooned Gampopa and said, look at my ass. It's filled with calluses from sitting in caves for decades. And he said, make effort. If you want to get enlightened, work hard. He said, that's the secret instruction. Now you have everything you need. And so he was like, that was his secret instruction to Gampopa. And Gampopa, I guess, told the story later. It was about effort, right? But what Milarepa was saying was, Dalai Lama was pointing out, is it takes effort, but if you create the causes, the result will come. So sometimes they say, like, well, how did Milarepa achieve enlightenment in one lifetime? He worked really hard, is what he was saying. And if we make it a little less hard, it'll take us numerous lifetimes. But what it's saying is, if you have obstacles, if you're not achieving some realization or whatever, it's because we didn't create the cause. So we have to create the cause, then the result will come, right? So it says here, and Shantideva says, right, anything becomes easy through familiarity. So it's like, whatever we want to achieve, we can achieve it. It's just, it takes time, and whether you can do it in one lifetime or 7 lifetimes or 3 countless great eons, you have to create the cause and then the result will come. So it's a confidence. Does that make sense? So the reason you don't get discouraged here isn't like some random, just convince yourself. It's saying everything arises due to causing conditions. The Grand Canyon can come about or whatever, all kinds of things can happen, right? Anything's possible if the causes are there. So, and Buddhism is saying, so then just study what are the causes and create them. And if it takes 1 lifetime, or if you die while you're doing it, then the next time will be easier. Good, keep doing that. That's what it's saying. I'm just going off on this again. I'm going off on tangents a little bit today. But part of that contact I was having with Rebbe Rinpoche, the boy who's 16. It's kind of funny, like teaching, tantric teaching that I'm 55, and like for many, many years I wanted to get this certain tantric teaching. I still haven't gotten it. I haven't found somebody to give it. And so I still haven't gotten that teaching. I never got it from Rebbe Rinpoche. I didn't think to ask him because he was sick, But I recently heard from somebody that Rebbe Rinpoche was a specialist in that practice, and at 16 he just received the entire transmission, the initiation, all the commentary to it. My point is like, if the causes are there, the result will have, right? He was a great master who taught it to others, and my point is the causes and conditions, right? In other words, he had created the causes in past lives. So at 16, as soon as his brain is old enough to understand it, immediately he's receiving all the teaching, the initiation, the teachings, the transmissions, everything, of that, and so like, so it was a good teaching on that point, right? Whatever you create the causes for will happen, like falling into your hands, right? So what's the teaching for me? Well, I didn't create the causes, so I need to work harder creating the causes. Then eventually the result will come, right? He created the causes over many lifetimes, so the result happens life after life for him. Anyway, that's that. So then it says, therefore, without being afraid or unhappy, achieve your purposes with an appropriate method, right? With an appropriate method is an important part there. If you are uplifted by the steadfast splendor of skill, you have in your hands the accomplishment of all your goals, right? So it's saying you can achieve anything if you know how to create the cause for that thing, right? And if you can't create, you can create the cause now, whether the result will happen. So it's, remember I was saying earlier about, what's the word? Belief or faith is the foundation of aspiration, which gives rise to effort. This is making that point. It's saying, understand causality, right? And then what's the point of getting discouraged? Just create causes. In other words, and if you were to get discouraged and stop creating the causes, then the result will never come about. But if you think, well, I didn't create the causes. So if I think that, right, about that teaching, if I think, well, I didn't create the causes, so the result didn't come about, that's okay. But in other words, skill, I know how to create that cause, so you, right, do the Guru Puja, you visualize all the lamas there, and there's a, because what's the cause of receiving teachings? It's, you visualize requesting the teaching, offering a golden Dharma wheel and requesting teachings on behalf of all sentient beings, right? That's the cause, one of the causes for, for receiving deep Dharma teachings in the future, and so on. There are all kinds of causes, but the point is Buddhism teaches, right, the causes and the effects. So whatever result you want to achieve, create the causes for that. And then you don't have to get discouraged. So it's a kind of resilient, that's a kind of resilience, right? And when you look at the world and you see like, oh, it seems discouraging because there's so much suffering, then you can recognize, oh, wait a second. If I create, like actually, if you don't like the state of this world, right? Actually, then you can think, well, if I create bodhicitta, then I'll be like Amitabha Buddha. I'll create a different world. I'll create a Buddhaverse that's different than this one. Whatever, where beings can become educated in some different way and enlightened in some other way. If you think that this world's there's too much suffering or something, too much difficulty, because that's possible, is the point. You just have to, anyway, that's the Buddhist view on the topic. I'll keep going. I'll cover these 5 and then I'll give time. Or unless, anyway, maybe I'll give one more. Oh, go ahead, Lynn. Let's pause there. Or comment.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think I've spoken about the judge that I knew that I clerked for.
Yeah.
He was an amazing human being. So when he was much younger, we had a dinner for him after 25 years on the bench in the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court. And so Justice Marshall arranged it. So he was at the dinner and he was getting really old and grumpy. And he was very prescient. He said, he was really grumpy and he knew he was going to die pretty soon. And he
Marshall
said,
was?
What? Say it again.
Who was grumpy? Justice Marshall?
Justice
Who was being
Marshall.
grumpy?
Justice Marshall. Yeah, Thurgood Marshall.
Justice.
So he said, in giving sort of a talk about Judge Bryan, he said, things are going to get really bad in this country, meaning this country. And he said, but he's one of the good ones. Sort of meaning, I'm going to pass, but he will live on and be the cause of things to come, which was prescient. But it was sort of what you're talking about. Even if the person that created the conditions leaves, the conditions go on.
Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I remember that because he was really grumpy. Somebody took a picture and he blew up and he was really grumpy.
Well, and I guess you should tell the story. At least my own feeling is like, and you're also carrying on that
Well, in my own small way, yeah.
effort, that effort in the world, at least, isn't it? You received like a lineage or
a little bit, yeah.
yeah. But that's how it continues, isn't it? Hmm. Well, thank goodness, isn't it, that there are people who carry that on. Yeah, any other comments or it's a beautiful story. Well, I'll keep going then. It's a similar territory, so we'll keep going. So the next one is the effort of irreversibility, which Art translates as unrelenting. I was sort of checking. I mean, I really like Art, but he has I think each translator, who they are is a cross, and sometimes his word choices give a sense of who he is, unrelenting, or irreversible. So it says here, the effort of irreversibility is an accomplished mental enthusiasm such that one cannot be diverted by other circumstances at the time of engaging in virtuous activities. And then he quotes Jason Kappa. When you don armor-like effort, steady and irreversible, your excellent qualities of scriptural learning and realization will increase like the waxing moon. All your conduct will be meaningful, and whatever actions are undertaken will be accomplished as desired. Understanding this, the conqueror's spiritual children embark on great waves of effort, eliminating all laziness. So for this one, the unrelenting or irreversible quality, that's often used, the Jason Kappa's image there of the waxing moon. In other words, whatever happens, once the moon's waxing, it's going to wax full, right? And that's a metaphor for this kind of irreversible or irreversible effort. So it's like a, so this one emphasizes a certain point, which is like, it's similar to the previous one, but a little different, right? The previous one was not getting discouraged. This one is like, I'll bring it to completion. You know, it's like that, it's unrelenting until you're done. You know, so it's like, unrelenting or irreversible, or, and like the waxing moon. So in other words, that you can, like, it's like, and do you ever have the sense with people, like there are sometimes people like that where you feel like, oh, you know, do you know that feeling? Like there's some people where, like, if they say they'll do something, you think it may or may not happen, right? And then there are other people where they say they'll do something, and it's like the waxing moon. In other words, you know, when the moon is starting to wax, it's going to go to full, right? There are some people where, you know, if they say, I've got this, then they've got it, and you don't have to think about it again. You know it's going to happen. Bodhisattva, this kind of effort, this kind of, bodhisattva effort, or any kind of, this kind of effort's like that. In other words, it's like where once the person has undertaken something, it's like irreversible. That's good. I think irreversible is a good word. In other words, like it's going to be completed no matter what, you know. And so this is that kind of effort. So it's cultivating that, so that you know, so if we cultivate that kind of effort, then people know, people know people like that, right? People, you know, and this would be becoming that kind of person for others, right? Where other people would look at you and go, oh, when that person said, you know, when so-and-so says they're going to do it, they do it, and it's done. You know, there's no, you don't have to think, oh, are they going to show up? Oh, maybe they won't get here. Oh, maybe they won't finish. You know, that person will do the task no matter what effort is taken. You know, even if it's quite difficult at some point, they're going to finish it. And then the last of these five is we call it the of non-complacency, or other translators called it unquenchable effort or insatiable effort. And it says here, so the of non-complacency is the exertion that does not just rest complacent with some trifling virtue, but seeks higher qualities. And so another, I guess you read, I think it says, it's not letting our present good qualities deteriorate while continually cultivating more good qualities. So the effort of non-complacency is like, you don't rest on your laurels or something, right? You don't just say, oh, I did something good, so that's enough. Like, and actually, I was just recently, I was thinking about Professor Bob Thurman, who many of you know. Like, he's well into his, he's older now, right? But he's continually, I mean, I was like, thinking, wow, he's like always making effort. You know, he's writing another book, and he's creating a podcast, and he's, you know, running two different Dharma centers, and he's organizing events with all kinds of people, trying to make the world a better place, right? Like, and continuously. Anyway, the point is, like, so not, you know, so whether it's in your study, whether it's in your practice, it's in your, you know, efforts for others or whatever, it's a non-complacency is like you keep trying to create vaster goodness. And another point is, you know, the bodhisattvas, and this is another implication of this non-complacency effort, is bodhisattvas, you know, create vast efforts, right? Their efforts are huge. You know, it says, so like, you know, like in the bodhisattva, what's it called? The Arya Samantabhadra's prayer, right? It's sometimes called the all good prayer or something like that. There are different translations, but it's in English. But anyway, he has these things, right, where he talks about, like, you know, for as many, you know, on as many atoms as there are Buddha fields, you know, like he's prostrating, right? And he thinks of bodies as many as the atoms, and he has these kind of very vast, you know, and there are many verses in there where he just talks about these things about, like, you know, for as many sentient beings as there are, you know, sentient beings have all these different aspirations, and my aspirations reach out to all of them and lead them all to enlightenment and so on. So this is kind of very vast mind. So anyway, this effort of non-complacency is kind of, you know, whatever you, so in this sense that it's like a mind that even when you achieve something, you bring it to completion, then you want to do the next virtuous thing, right? So you can see the order of them also, right? The armor like was before you start. In some way, the non-complacency is after you finish a virtuous thing, you pick up another, right? Or you can carry different ones at the same time. By the way, one point they say in Buddhism is from a karmic perspective. It's connected to this. They actually say that starting things and not finishing them is considered to be like, if it's something meaningful, if it's a meaningless activity, it's good not to finish it. But if you, because it's wasting your time. But if you start something meaningful and you don't, that you intend to finish and then you kind of leave it undone, they actually say it's like a bad karmic pattern or something. And so what they say is, be careful about taking up, if you take up something saying, I want to complete this task, be judicious in what you take up. And then if you take it up, do your best to bring it to completion, because that's a good karmic pattern, right? Of, you're careful in what you take on, you take it on, you make the effort and you complete it, and then you carefully take on the next thing, or you take on a few at once, but not too many so that you go overwhelmed and then give up. That's not a good pattern. So this is also getting at that you bring things to completion and then you pick up another, and you don't just haphazardly sort of not do what you say you'll do and not finish it. And then now the author makes some interesting points here. He says, furthermore, taking a minute branch of the path as principle and discarding the others is a serious hindrance to depositing imprints of the path in its entirety. Therefore, it is crucial that you gain an overview of the entire path. So there he's saying an interesting point, in which he's saying, when making effort, about this thing of not being small or not sort of limiting yourself too much, he's saying, don't just take up one little practice and leave out something. Don't make it complete. And so actually, that's an oral instruction that comes down, like I've seen both Lamas Zopa and Khenso Rinpoche both made this point personally when I've been there, is like the imprints of the entire path. So like, they sometimes say every day review the entire Lamrim, a short prayer, for example. That's an oral instruction they say, because it's making imprints for the entire path. Also Tantra, right? Like to read those, each tantric system, like whether it's Mantaka or Vajrayogini or Chakra Samvara or Guhya Samaja or whatever, they have like a prayer usually that covers the entire path, the generation complete stage. And they say it's good to like review that regularly. So you're leaving imprints for the entire path. So you're keeping like a vast mind. And then he quotes Lama Tsongkhapa in the Great Stages of the Path, right, where he says, Arya Asanga repeatedly taught that it is necessary to have two qualities, not to be discouraged, even though you might have understood well the method for training in the great vehicle deeds. So there he's saying, why would you not, what's he saying there? He's saying, when you study the great vehicle deeds, the Mahayana, it can seem daunting, right? And so he's saying, when you study that and you understand it, don't be discouraged. It's okay, step by step. You don't have to do more than you can do, but you can go step by step and you can achieve those kinds of paths. So he's saying, when you study that, don't get discouraged. And then he says, and not to be complacent with merely some trifling good quality. Then Lama Tsongkhapa says, nowadays, the following appears to happen, whether it be an imitation or an actual good quality. And that's an interesting point. Imitation of a good quality or an actual good quality. Sometimes we have to be honest with ourselves, right? Sometimes we have no good qualities. We have an imitation. I've had that experience where I notice, I have an imitation now of a good quality. And that's better than nothing, actually. So in other words, I think what he's getting at is actually kind of funny, but good, which is, if the best you can do is an imitation of a good quality, at least that's something, and then keep going, and then make it, eventually it can become real. I've caught myself in that. I'm like, now I can kind of imitate that thing. I can't actually do it yet for real, but at least it's a start, and then you try to really actually have the good quality in yourself, because good qualities are real, right? Things in you, in our actual quality. So whether it be an imitation or an actual good quality, if one attains a mere portion of it and one becomes complacent about one's familiarity with just that, thinking, I've made great progress on the path, right? So he's saying, so what's Lama Tsongkhapa saying up to that point? He's saying, if you achieve one little good quality, good, that's a good thing, but don't then think, I've made such great progress, I rest on your laurels. Then he's saying, and then he makes an interesting point. He says, then when an expert in the essential points of the path confronts you with a yardstick of scripture and reasoning and explains to you out of kindness, basically, even though that is indeed some good quality, with that alone, you haven't been anywhere, right? In other words, that's not much compared to the vast, so somebody who's really studied the Mahayana, right, may out of kindness to you say, yes, you've achieved this one little good quality, good, but that's really not much of anything compared to the vast qualities that a bodhisattva has to cultivate. He says, if somebody explains it in that way and understanding dawns, then one becomes totally discouraged. Although it is necessary to seek higher attributes without being complacent about a portion of some good quality and train in the infinite objects of trainings, the absence of discouragement seems to be very rare. So what's he getting at, right? You get it, right? In other words, we can develop very small minds, actually, right? Where we either, and what's he saying? That we can either kind of develop a tiny little good quality and then hide away, sort of say, oh, I did that, that's good enough. And then if somebody points out to us the vast qualities that we have to achieve, develop to become enlightened, and then he says most people become quite discouraged. Right? And Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, and simply don't do that. He's saying, if you cultivate a little good quality, rejoice in it. The instruction will be rejoice in that. Rejoice in that good quality, and then recognize I can create the causes of other good qualities. And actually, I just want to say, and it's true, actually, it is easy to get discouraged, right? If you look at, like, for example, it's not easy to develop calm abiding, let's say, right? Or it's not easy to develop bodhicitta. Those are hard to achieve. But what this is saying is, first of all, Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, but you can do it, and so for one point he's saying is don't be discouraged. Another point he's saying is, and you can create the causes, and then the results will come, right? And it may take a lifetime. I remember that one time I was receiving some like instruction from one of my teachers, and then he said that, it was kind of funny. He said, oh, it's really good. You're, like, he was recognizing I wasn't. It was a very advanced teaching, and he said something like, because of your aspiration, like because of receiving this and your aspiration and your sincerity, he said, then in some future life, you'll be a monk walking along, and suddenly the realization of this will dawn in your mind. And I thought, oh, that was interesting. It'll be in a future life. And then I thought, well, at least I'll be a monk. That's quite good. And if the realization will dawn, good. That sounds great, actually. I'm happy. I developed more enthusiasm for doing what he was describing, doing my best. But he was making a point also, like, don't think the results will necessarily come in this life, right? Like, it may take lives, and that's okay. But keep creating the cause, right? And then there will come a point when the result will come quite easily. That's what it was also implying that, right? One day you'll just be walking along and the result will go, in a future life. So the point there I'm making is, like, what they're saying is, like, past view, right? And though it may take many lifetimes, and that's okay. But keep creating the causes and the results will come. Then he says, the function of effort, and this is the author now, not Tsongkhapa. The function of effort is specified as thoroughly fulfilling and fully accomplishing the class of virtue, because the entire class of virtue is contingent upon effort. So what's he saying there? He's saying that realizations of the Dharma don't come about randomly, right? Actually, it's kind of funny. This is true of us, isn't it? Like, if I look at myself, honestly, like, it doesn't take any effort to have non-virtue happen. Like, in other words, actually, I could do that. So, like, if I don't do that, I don't do this. But if I wanted to, if I wanted to, let's say, if I were to go on, what's that? I never go on this Reddit, like where people post their opinions about things, right? If I went on there and looked at subreddits about people's political opinions, without any effort, I could become angry, right? It would be very easy. If I went on like it's effortless to become angry. I would just have to go there and see people expressing like hateful views towards each other. And I would be upset and disturbed and angry. It wouldn't take much effort, right? But universal love for all beings, as Wilhelmina was pointing out, that takes effort, right? Wilhelmina is making the effort to cultivate universal love towards people who disagree with her, right? Who are doing bad things or something. That takes effort, right? So what he's saying is, like, if you want to accomplish non-virtue, that's easy, right? But if you want to accomplish virtue, like Wilhelmina was doing with people who are, who she put it right, who are doing negative things, that takes effort. So he's saying all good things come about through effort, right? So the entire class of virtue is contingent upon effort. This mental factor, without this mental factor, nothing good will happen, right? You have to have effort in order for any virtue to come about. And then he quotes the exhortation of exceptional resolve. It says, by making effort, nothing whatsoever, whether created in this world or created beyond this world, is difficult to gain, right? And by the way, it's kind of funny, I think, sometimes when they say it's difficult, I'm just pointing this out because this cultural is, we think not, again, I'm going back to that's why I quoted that point about the Dalai Lama crying earlier. When we think not difficult to gain, we think like, I think, I mean, as a kid, I remember like, I remember as a kid, like, oh, I want pizza. We'd go get, we grew up like, oh, I want a McDonald's hamburger. We'd go get that. As if everything's like that, right? So by not difficult, they don't mean like that, is my point. What they mean is like, I remember when I was, if you looked at that book, The Easy Path, right? I edited that book by Kensler Rinpoche, where he says, what does easy mean? It says, why is it easy path? It's funny. And then he said, well, compared to, he said, ordinarily, it takes 3 countless great eons, right, to become a Buddha. But it's a path with great effort, in 1 lifetime or 7 lifetimes you can become, or 16 lifetimes you can become a Buddha. So that's easy. If you make humongous effort for 16 lifetimes, you can become a Buddha. That's easy, or 7 lifetimes, or, So when they say so we're going back, by making effort, nothing whatsoever with created in this world or created beyond this world is difficult to gain. They're not saying like you can go to the drive-through, right? When they say not difficult to gain, what they're saying is, with great effort, it will come about, and it's not difficult in the sense that it's not difficult to gain in the sense that it'll come about quite naturally, but they're not, I guess I'm just saying, in our culture, not difficult to gain can imply something incorrect, right? What they're saying is, with great effort, in just a few lifetimes, or in just this life, you can make great progress. In a few lifetimes, you can make amazing progress with effort, right? And then it says, that being the case, through the force of effort, what wise person would become weary? Those who are set on the enlightenment of Buddhahood, having seen the faults of lethargy and sleep, constantly dwell in making effort. This I have exhorted them to do. The Buddha exhorted them to do, right? So, it's very clear, I think. It's saying, and by the way, not having sleep doesn't mean don't sleep at all. But it means not to be, not that you're not like being, what's the word? You're not spending your life just sort of not making effort, that you rest in order to continue your effort, right? But if you're practicing bodhisattva way, actually, then even as you go to bed, right, you think, I'm going to sleep in order to continue my efforts for all beings, and then there are different sleep yogas, right? You do a sleep yoga. They're all different. There are many different practices where you fall asleep in a virtuous state of mind, right? So then even your sleep is virtue. So it doesn't mean don't sleep at all. It's just meaning even your sleep is part of your practice, right? And do you see how there's a sense of joy here and a sense of enthusiasm? It comes about because you see the point here that I hope that over and over again it's making this implication that, in other words, that through confidence, through conviction, that the causes will lead to results, right? Then you feel some sense of joy and confidence in that, and you feel, oh, this is great, I get to do this, and then the result will come, and you have a confidence the result will come, and then you start to see results coming, so you have more and more confidence, and therefore you make more and more effort with more and more enthusiasm. And then he quotes Maitreya's ornament, the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, the ornament of Mahayana Sutras. It says, among the hosts of virtues, effort is supreme. Independence upon it, one obtains all the other virtues. So in other words, effort is a supreme virtue because all the other virtues come through effort. Right? Through effort, one attains immediately a supreme state of happiness, and the mundane and supermundane attainments, right? So the mundane and supermundane cities, right? That they all come about through effort. And so you see the point here is like, yeah. And anyway, that one is immediate. It says here immediately a supreme state of happiness, right? That's because the process itself, in other words, if you're practicing with effort, it brings its own joy, right, in the process. And then also results come, the mundane results and supreme results come. Then it's through effort one obtains a desirable resources within samsara, right? Then through effort, one possesses outstanding purity. So he's getting at different kinds of results. So one is, if you make effort in doing virtue, even within samsara, what does it mean? Desirable resources, right? That's like if you practice generosity, even while you're in samsara, you'll have resources, wealth. If you practice morality, even within samsara, you'll have good rebirth. If you practice patience, then even within samsara, you'll have good friends, right? That's the karmic process, right? If you're if you're angry, you push people away. If you're patient, then you'll have good companions, right? So if you help others, you'll have people around you who are helpful, and so on, right? So that's the first one. Through effort at doing those practices, even within samsara, you'll have good results. Then through effort, one possesses outstanding purity, right? I think that refers to, through effort, you'll see emptiness, right? That's the most outstanding of purities, is you'll see the pure nature of things, right? Again, because you won't see emptiness effortlessly. It won't just happen, right? How does it happen? You have to study, right? What's the cause? The cause is, Chandrakirti says, he says a point, he says, even great Buddhist masters won't understand emptiness. Some of them haven't understood emptiness. Why? Because they hadn't got the causes. And he says, what's the cause? It's familiarity with the teachings of Nagarjuna, right? So in other words, by studying over and over again, reading over and over again, the Prajnaparamita Sutras, or studying the Heart Sutra, and studying Nagarjuna's teachings, and studying Chandrakirti's teachings, you create the cause, then the result of that, and then you contemplate them, right? And by contemplating them over and over again, you create the cause. Eventually the result will come, which is outstanding purity, understanding emptiness. Then through effort, one becomes freed by transcending the transitory collection. The transitory collection is your own aggregates, samsaric aggregates, right? So in other words, through effort, you become liberated from samsara. That's it, right? If you want to become liberated from samsara, it takes effort. And then through effort, one awakens to supreme enlightenment, Buddhahood itself, right? So what's he saying there? Whether you want good results in samsara, whether you want to become an Arya, whether you want to become liberated from samsara yourself, or whether you want to become fully enlightened, they all come about through effort. So make effort. And if you make effort, those things will come, right? All those results will come about. I'll just pause there briefly. Any questions about what he's saying? He's being pretty clear, right? Then he says, thus, since all excellent qualities follow upon effort, the method to generate effort is extremely important. In regards to this method, if you were to carefully analyze and understand the knowledge, meaning the Abhidharma passages cited above, the technique for generating effort will appear very extensive. Nevertheless, it is difficult for those of inferior intellect such as I to understand how to produce effort in dependence upon just those. So he's saying it's not so easy to generate the vast effort of a bodhisattva, right? He says, hence, it is of the utmost importance to know the following in accordance with the foremost omniscient Tsongkhapa's great exposition of the path to enlightenment. So first he's saying, effort, all good things come about through effort, so we have to know how do we give rise to effort, right? And he says, all these quotes I just gave explain that, but he says, in case it's difficult for you, basically, here's what Tsongkhapa says in a kind of simple format. Think about the benefits of effort, right? Isn't that first? And so in the great treatise in the Lamrim, he says, first think about the great benefits of effort, right? So he's saying, how do you give rise to effort? First, think about it. Think, oh, wow, in other words, giving rise to effort will bring all these good results, and you'll develop a kind of enthusiasm. Then think about the disadvantages of not doing so, right? What are the disadvantages of not having effort? And actually, one of those I want to point out is, this is getting at fear. The part of how we generate effort is excitement or joy, not excitement maybe, but joy or enthusiasm, by thinking about the benefits of effort and virtue. But the disadvantage of not doing so is, sometimes we think fear is bad, but in Buddhism, fear can be a good thing, right? Because in other words, what it's saying is, it's saying actually we should be afraid. In other words, that if I don't make some effort at doing good things, then nothing good will come about, and bad things will happen, right? In other words, if I don't make any effort in virtue, I'll waste this precious human life, and I'll make others suffer, and I'll make myself suffer, and in the end, I'll go to lower realms. That's an incredible waste of time, incredible waste of an opportunity. So he's saying, think of the disadvantages. The disadvantages are very extensive, right? You can think of the lower realms as an example of disadvantage. You can think of the suffering of the world as a disadvantage, right? You can think of the suffering of not being enlightened as a disadvantage. So anyway, there are vast disadvantages. Then the way in which it stops the discords, excuse me, the discordant class, the laziness of procrastination, the adherence to unwholesome activities, and indolence. So there, you think about that effort is wonderful because it overcomes the three kinds of laziness, right? So you think about that. And finally, you think about the way to practice the favorable conditions for effort, the four powers: the power of belief, the power of steadfastness, the power of joy, and the power of abandonment. He says, since I cannot mention everything here, you should understand them by carefully pursuing, engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds, that's Shantideva, and the great exposition of the stages of the path, the Lamrim. So before we stop today, we're almost out of time, but I want to say a couple of things. One is, I want to cover what are those four. He said he covered four things, so I don't want to leave that. And also to say, this is a whole topic, isn't it? To contemplate effort, right? And I want to say, like, if you want to contemplate it, there are teachings on it here that we just started going over, but also, in English, there's the great stages of the path. It's in English, has a whole section on effort. The middle length stages of the path has a whole section on effort. And there's a beautiful section of effort in that, and I mentioned in Art's Engel's translation of the Bodhisattva's path to unsurpassed enlightenment. And then Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, as he mentions, has a whole chapter on effort. That's beautiful. But let's go back before we stop. So what are these four favorable conditions to effort? Because they're practical instruction. That's quite beautiful. And they were in the middle length Lamrim for those who took that class. But they're quite good. So the first is the power of belief, or sometimes translated as the power of aspiration. So that is, you meditate on what we've been talking about, causes and effects to generate belief and aspiration about what to adopt and what to discard. So it's saying here, how do you develop effort? First of all, the first one, the power of belief or aspiration, is you meditate on, what do you want to achieve and what are the causes for that, right? And by meditating on the causes for it, you start to develop an aspiration to do those things, right? And you develop a kind of joy in doing them because you understand that that the causes will bring the results, right? And if you understand in that teaching on karma, right, that if you create a cause, the result will come. If you create a non-virtuous cause, suffering will come. Create a virtuous cause, happiness will come. And the more you study cause and effect, what this is saying, and contemplate it, think about it, the more you'll develop a kind of belief and conviction and aspiration to do virtuous things in order to bring about positive results. So that's the first of these four. The next one is the power of steadfastness or fortitude, as some call it. And that one is saying this is, so first you've thought about cause and results. So you know what, and then you start to develop enthusiasm and aspiration. That is saying, this one is, don't pursue things impulsively. Investigate and analyze carefully what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And actually, it's getting a point here, which is, what are your values? Life is short, right? Life doesn't last long. What's worth, there are many, first of all, there are many distractions in life. And then among virtuous activities, they have a lot of choices. Who are you? What really matters? What's worth pursuing? What's worth your effort, right? And then, so really analyze carefully, like, what's mine to do? That's a question, right? There are many things to do, but what's mine to do? What are my talents? What are my capacities? Analyze it really carefully. Don't be impulsive. And then the steadfast or fortitude is, and then really commit to a certain thing, right? Really make a commitment, say, this is what is worth my effort. I understand cause and effect now, the first one. And this one, based on my understanding of cause and effect, I'm not gonna, there are many, like, people might say, oh, here, do this, oh, do that, oh, people will say worldly, meaningless things, and people will give you advice about different karmic things to do. That's fine, or you can see in text or whatever. But it's saying, analyze carefully and decide, what do I want to commit myself to doing, right? And whether that's, a certain course of study, or a certain retreat, or a certain daily practice, or a certain project you want to undertake, whatever it may be, whether it's a project to benefit the world, something to help people. Think very carefully. Don't just say yes. And if somebody even, even in Buddhism, they say that, don't, like, because of honesty. I often think that there's value. Like, you know, people say, oh, you want to do this? And like, you know, if you, I'll notice that, like, good practitioners say, maybe, let me think about it, right? Like, they don't just go, oh yeah, let's do, you know, like, whereas I've noticed that when I've like friends who are really good practitioners, they let me think about it, and they really think about it. Like, they do this power of steadfastness, because once they say yes, it's going to happen. If that makes sense, you know, like, and you know that. Then the power of joy is the third of these four, and that one says, the power of joy makes your effort uninterrupted and insatiable, like a child at play. That's a beautiful, I love that description, like a child at play, right? So that one is, once you've committed, right? And that's part of this thing of the first one, the steadfast, you know, one is, don't commit to something that you're not going to be joyful doing, right? Like, that's, you know, like, that's a mistake, right? Then you're going to like get discouraged and burned out and things. So what it's saying is, like, really be careful what you commit to, and commit to things that make you feel like a child at play, right? And so that's like, you know, like, and that even applies to, like, you know, they're all like, you know, I've thought that if you practice, especially Vajrayana, I think it's true of, you know, sometimes if you take certain teachings or certain empowerment, something, there's a commitment, right? And so it's like, that's an example here is, you know, if your feeling is, oh no, there's a commitment, I don't want to have to do that, it's a daily commitment, you know, or something, or oh, I have to, sometimes the Lama will say you have to retreat. You know, if you're going to take this initiation teaching, you have to retreat. And if your feeling is, oh no, long retreat, then don't take it. Or that's a mistake, right? Then, I mean, go back to the steadfast one. Then there's something wrong. You know, either learn more before you take it, or something, or don't take it, or it's not the one for you, or study more about why you would take it. You know, because it is. Whereas on the other hand, like, if you feel like, oh wow, cool, I get to do that practice every day. You know, like, actually, it's funny, isn't it? Like, sometimes people, like, some people when they study like Vajrayana, they go, oh no, it's too many commitments or something, and I don't want to take it off. Then there are other people where it's like, you know, like, I was going back to like a teenager. You know, if a teenager has a video game, and then you say, oh, if you say to that teenager, oh, there's a brand new, like, even better video game, I'll buy it for you. They don't think, oh no, I have to practice another video game, right? Like, oh no, don't buy me that one. Now I have another, like, you know, they think, awesome, wow, I get to play it. You know, I get to stay, oh, I want to stay up all night if I can. Then I won't do my homework. That's awesome. Like, I want to, you know, because I get another video game or something. My point is like, the power of joy is like that, right? It's like, so whatever the practice is, it's like, oh, awesome, I can do that practice. Oh, cool. You know, like, if you have that attitude, then that's the right, then you undertake it, and then you have the joy while you're doing it, like a child at play. So you cultivate that kind of attitude, right? And I've noticed that also, like, just make a quick comment, like, people, I've talked to people who do retreats, and it's been really interesting. I've noticed is that when people, like, some people go into a retreat and feel like, oh, I have to finish this number of this, and then they feel kind of burdened sometimes, you know, oh, I have to do this number of things. And then there are other people where they go on retreat and they feel like, I've noticed that they'll say like, oh wow, like, it was so fun, like, you know, I'm doing this, and then I get to do that practice, and then I get to pause and do this other practice, and it's fun to them. It's like a game. It's actually like, if they feel like a child, you can tell they feel like a child at play. And my point is, that's the better version, right? Whether it be a retreat or working for others, or, you know. And I think that also, even with the center, like, I noticed that sometimes, like, we would have, you know, I don't like meetings. Sometimes we'd have these meetings, and I'd be like, oh, I was definitely not feeling like a child at play, because I don't like business meetings, any kind, you know, like, and I'd be like, oh no, a meeting, you know. And then I was like, point is like, the best you can set things up in your life so it feels like play, right? That's what this is saying. That doing virtue feels like play. Set your life up as best you can. It's not perfect, but do it that way as best you can. Then even when bad things come, you could think, oh, awesome, I get to have this challenge, you know, like, you know, because again, I'm going back to, like, when, if someone, you know, I was thinking of, like, I'm using the analogy of kids at play, right? Like, if they're really good, if they really like play, like, what's it say, right? Like, you know, you don't, when you're at play, you don't care if something doesn't go, like, if the thing breaks or it falls apart, you start over, right? You know, if you're like making a toy village and then it falls down, well, you start making the toy village again, because the process is fun, if that makes sense, right? You don't get discouraged and think, oh, it's like, you know, some kids do, but it's kind of silly, isn't it? Like, the idea is that, like, if it's play, then the process is supposed to be fun, so you just keep going, you know. It's that kind of attitude here. And then the last one is important also, so I'm glad we can cover these four. The last one is the power of suspension, it's called here, right? Or the power of abandonment. I prefer suspension. I don't think abandonment's a good term. I use the translation. There are different translators. I use the power of suspension. And that one is knowing when, I'm going to say it this way, knowing when to rest your body and mind before returning to your joyous effort. So in other words, that if you're going to sustain joyous effort for 3 countless great eons, or for, what did the other one say? For an ocean of, for, each year is an eon, and then it's an ocean of those kinds of years, which whatever those metaphors are. Then you have to know when to rest, right? And how to rest. And that, and again, like, I'll just say, like, I remember, I'm just going to share, last point. A point that for me was very helpful that Lama Zopa Rinpoche said one time in teaching, where he said, the person who knows, how do you say it? He said, the person who knows the thought of no need in their mind. That's the translation he used. Lama Zopa Rinpoche has his own way of saying Dharma. He said, for the person who understands the Dharma of no need, something like that, in their mind, even just laying around, other people, he said, other people can't imagine the joy that person has. Even they're just laying around doing whatever, they're just sitting in their house, but they have a joy that nobody else can understand. Actually, the ordinary person can't understand it. And what he was getting at was the joy of Dharma. It's actually no need is going back to the mental afflictions, right? It's what is no need? Actually, I think that was his translation of non-attachment, right? Which means so it's the antidote. In other words, for the person who knows the Dharma antidotes in their mind, they know joy, right? Whatever they're doing. So the point is, when the bodhisattvas rest in this one, right? They know when to rest, but that rest is not laziness. It's a kind of joyous effort. Does that make sense? That what he's saying here is that resting is a part of joyous effort, but when you do it skillfully. Anna, comment.
Yes. So we should all make effort to do virtual activities. All the time. But if we make effort to make our mental affliction less, like less desire, less angry, and less anger, or less ignorance, would that be also a virtual activities?
That's a supreme kind of virtuous activity. It's an excellent, yes. So that's a great kind of virtuous activity. It's one of the most important of all the virtuous activities, is that one. And that's one of the main activities of bodhisattva. So yes, that's a great example of that. Would be
we are not doing activity. We just change our mental state.
Mental activity. I mean.
It's
a mental.
It's also
mental activity.
Virtual activities. Yes. Oh, okay. I thought you have to do something. Activity.
No.
Behavior.
Oh. No. So like if you're just sitting, that's what. Yeah. No. Exactly. You're right. Like, so in other words, joyous effort could be. It's a really important point. Like, in our world, sometimes we think of effort as people out there building a house or making a stupa or whatever. If it's Buddhist, we might think, oh, they're building a stupa or something. But no, what this is saying is exactly what you're saying, Anna. That it's like if you're just sitting quietly in your house thinking about Dharma to decrease your mental afflictions, that's effort. So you might be like, if somebody might look at you and you look like you're doing nothing, But if in your mind you're thinking about, let's say, the value of love, and then as overcoming anger, decreasing your anger through the power of love, or decreasing your attachment through understanding emptiness or something, they would say that's an excellent form of effort, of joyous effort.
Okay, just like, for example, I was thinking of developing more compassion.
Perfect. That's an excellent example of effort, of joyous effort. So in other words, if you think, oh, it's really wonderful to develop more compassion,
mm-hmm.
and then like you're just sitting quietly somewhere, just think about that, or you're doing whatever, and thinking that, then that would be and then you think, and you're making effort at that would be this mental factor, excellent example of it, and very wonderful. And so, you don't have to be doing something physical or verbal to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Really good point. Yeah. Good. Okay, I'm glad you asked that, though. That's a really important point for all of us. So the effort doesn't mean physical or verbal. It could mean mostly it's mental, actually, anyway. So the most important ones are in your mind, as Anna pointed out. So in other words, the physical efforts are good, they're okay, but the main thing is in your mind, actually. So that's the main one. Actually, you should be cultivating, so if you're cultivating compassion, that's the main kind of really, or cultivating wisdom, so those are the most important. But okay, we should stop. And the dates for November and December are already on the website, so we're good with that, but we should do the verses of dedication. The supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. And I dedicate all these virtuous merits, which are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, so that the I, who is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, may achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, in order to lead all sentient beings who are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, to the state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. Well, thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
See you
That
next
was
class.
Wonderful.
Thank you.